Thank you so much for coming. It's nice to see so many people who care about science and science fiction and reading. Uh, I'm from Sri Lanka, and if we did this there, we'd have 10 people, and 5 of them would pretend they read my books, right? But Thomas is very kindly asked to do this panel with
Yes.
me.
Yeah. So why don't we start with just figuring out some stuff about you guys? Are there any like scientists in the room? Are there
Hands
people
up,
whose life
scientists.
is science?
Yeah,
Okay,
science.
cool.
Women in science. Sciences. Yeah.
Are
Five,
there?
five, six scientists.
Please don't
Six
be ashamed to
scientists.
be a scientist.
No, no, no.
Yes.
Are there any? Okay,
Any ISRO scientists here?
specifically.
Well, you guys have a space program, and that's really amazing, and it's in your city. So,
Are there any sci-curious people here?
Psy Curious? Yes! Go Psy Curious!
Okay. So.
Any moon landing deniers or
Okay, no.
anti vaxxers?
No, no, no.
Okay, good.
Okay, so Navin, I'll. Why don't you start? You're a writer. You're a writer of hard science fiction specifically. So why don't you tell us why you got into the genre generally? Why you choose to write in it? What excites you about this area?
Okay, so indulge me for just a moment, please. I got into hard science fiction when I was 9 years old. My dad had given me a book about, it was some sort of weird Star Wars picture book the previous year, right? And I thought science fiction had lasers, you know, it had lightsabers and things that didn't make sense, because why not? That's fun, right? And by the way, that is perfectly fine, that's fun. But my dad gave me an Odyssey book. He didn't give me 2001. He gave me 2061. He gave me the third book. I'm 9 years old. He gives me the third book in the Odyssey series, right? So I'm sitting there going, this book, number one, has no pictures, sorry, right? Number two, after a while, I'm going, okay, there are no guns in this, right? No one is shooting anyone. There's no clear bad guy. And then I'm going, wait a minute. What is this place, Europa? Wait, there's a moon around. Okay, how many moons does Jupiter have, right? And we didn't have Wikipedia. We're like, Mama, like, how many moons does Jupiter have? And like, I probably just chased out of the kitchen or whatever, right? But okay, we have worlds. We have ice worlds, which have life that's evolving in them that's hydrothermal based, which is what all our chemistry is. There are ice worlds like this all over the solar system. We could be in a solar system booming with life, and it's all locked under hundreds of kilometers of ice. Right? And because these are low gravity worlds, they would have gigantic creatures in them. Right? We could be the small little specks on one little speck of dust in the solar system, just filled with giants who will never see space because they're under hundreds of kilometers of ice. And this could be every solar system. Yeah, right? So when you're 9 and you go, wait, this is a thing? It breaks your brain. And my brain is still broken today, and I write science fiction. But what got me there was for the first time, well, in my brief life at the time, I went, wait a minute, I'm reading something about the future that could be real. This is possible. It may even be probable. And that is what is interesting for me about hard science fiction. Hard science fiction is where you make sure your facts are right. You may break a couple, and then people read doctrinal might give you trouble, people like me, right? But you get your facts right. And the more correct your science is, the more useful what you're writing out becomes as a possible predictive tool, right? And you want, when you write hard science fiction, you want your readers to go away and go, you know what? This is possible. Is this probable? Now, how do I feel about that? Am I uncomfortable about the future that was presented over here? What am I going to do about it if I am uncomfortable, right? How many people here have children? Hands up. Bunch of hands going up. Okay.
How many people here are children?
Sorry? Cats do not count. I mean, they do in their world, but not for the purpose of this panel, right? So, modern Homo sapiens have been around for 300,000 years. But we have maybe 100 years left as modern Homo sapiens, right? The humans will get to Mars, but it won't be humans who get to Jupiter, right? There'll be transhumans. If you have children here, you're looking at the people who are going to see that transition maybe, assuming we don't see it, right? If you have children here, they're going to either become or design or create, trying to create the next group of humans, right? The transhumans who are going to follow us, and maybe the post-humans who will be nothing like us. We are on the edge of what could be a Cambrian explosion of intelligences, right? This is a future we are rushing to. If you work in IT, you know about this. If you're working on AI, you may be creating these things, right? If you work in nanotechnology, you may be making these things happen. But if you don't, climate change will destroy us. So where do we go with this, right? These are the choices we have. These are all possible, probable futures. And that's why I think, again, going back to our topic of putting the science in science fiction, I think if you put the science in, you get something that's pretty useful for looking at what possible futures are out there and whether we want to put up with them or not. Thomas?
Yeah. So
Oh, sorry. One real quick.
yeah, sure.
Okay. Sorry. Have any of you read The Land Ironclads by H.G. Wells? Right. It's a short story he did where he wrote it before World War One, and he went, okay, so we have all these guys with twirly mustaches and the machine guns, and they're going to meet other guys with the twirly mustaches and the machine guns. And what's going to happen when that happens? A lot of people will die, and then they will dig holes, they will dig trenches, and they will hide in them. And you'll pound them with artillery, and they'll go, well, we're safe, we're in a trench. They'll need something else to break this. They'll need a land ironclad, this big, heavy, armored vehicle that can punch through these lines, right? Now, H.G. Wells was a pacifist, right? He wasn't someone from the Prussian Junker Corps. He wasn't someone from Whitehall. He wasn't someone given infinite resources to sit down and plan the next great war, the next general war. But he had imagination, and he outthought all these morons who went, oh, yes, we will march that way. Well, what? There's no one there left to march anymore. Like, he outthought all these people. And here's why this story is particularly useful for prediction, and also a bit ironic. Winston Churchill read the story and went, wait a minute, this is how we're going to break the trenches. We're going to build these things. Let's call them, what should we code name? We'll call them tanks. We'll build tanks. So a pacifist created tanks, right, by predicting in the story. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there. So sorry.
Oh no, that is a cool story. So I don't think about science or science fiction in terms of usefulness. I don't think that is the sort of best way to kind of measure these things. But I want to talk about just the fact that, like, why for me hard sci-fi is interesting is just because science is cool. Like, science is this amazing thing. It's one of the few ways that we have of knowing just anything, like, knowing the universe, knowing ourselves, just being curious. It is the language of, like, learning and being curious. And it's sort of interesting the kind of people that sort of articulate an interest in, like, these things, like, because we sometimes confuse science and technology, and sometimes they're the same thing, but very often they're not. Like, think about, like, computer science engineering and theoretical physics. There is no reason that someone who, like, designs a web application or is interested in that cares about whether the fundamental particle of the universe is a string. Like, there is no connection between these things. Like, even within, say, computer science engineering, there is a huge difference between, like, someone who's interested in code or someone who's interested in engineering, right? An engineer builds a bridge and they test it, and then a car can go over it. Like, coding is much more like, you build a bridge as you're going along, and cars keep going, and the bridge is complete when cars stop exploding, and you go, like, I'm done.
Well, what a way to go out.
And so I don't think that and I don't have a science background, and I approach science and my sort of interest in it comes from my interest in other things. It comes from my interest in art, it comes from my interest in people and societies, and how do we organize these things, and what happens, if you change this one aspect of the world that we live in, like, well, how does it change us? And so I do believe that, like, to some extent, if you're a genre fan, if you, like, have a particular, like, favorite thing, whether it's science fiction or fantasy or whatever, what you're really picking is, like, an aesthetic, right? You like, you prefer space and robots and spaceships, or you prefer sort of medieval, like, history and swords and things like that. But essentially, it's the same stories, right? It's the stories of people, the stories of emotions, the story of struggle and loss. And these are the things. We come for the robots, but we stay for the humanity, right? Without that, you don't have anything. So.
Yes. However, if you remove the science from a science fiction story and it still works as a story and perfectly fine, then it wasn't a science fiction story, was it?
He has a very strict
Yes.
definition that I don't
So
adhere to.
yes.
So, no, why don't you tell us about maybe a particular uh, a particular book or a particular sort of uh, why you write hard science fiction in this moment, the logic of a certain book, whether it was responding to something in particular, a problem that you saw, like.
Yes. Wow. I'm glad for that question, Thomas. It's almost like we were ready for it. Just really quickly, though, we were having this discussion beforehand, like how do we deal with the fact? So how do we deal with the fact that we don't want to come across as hard science fiction snobs or whatever? And Thomas is not a hard science fiction snob. What we discovered in the
So
conversation is that
easy.
I am a hard science fiction snob. Right? So oh well, it's out there. But I wrote a story to help me sleep at night. It's called the 100-gram Mission, available on Amazon. Anyway, I wrote a story that I need to get through my system because I am terrified, and still quite terrified about climate change. Right? Like we're not in a country. Well, you guys are definitely in a country with the resources to deal with these issues. Right? We in Sri Lanka. I mean, like, come on, man. Our government is so hilarious. We had a really crap dictator who was so crap he stopped being a dictator, and the people who got rid of him, well, they're going to lose an election next weekend, and then we'll get the dictator's brother, who is on a mission for revenge, right? So that is how competent we are at handling our problems at a government level. So how do people from small countries, how do people go, look, what happens when people go, that country has lots of rain, and up north there may not be as much rain, and people want to come over. Like, how do we deal with that? How can we help those people? Are we going to be morons? Will we get run over? Will the Chinese start dropping bombs on people? Like, what happens? Like, how do we not end up as a little island Syria? Right? How many countries in the world are facing this? Syria was a climate change war, by the way, yeah, because they went through the largest drought in modern memory, and people went, look, I'd rather die than put up with this, right? Like, and who remembers how powerful Syria was back in the day and the things that they would do? Syria, Libya, these places are all gone, right? They're footnotes, they're warnings of what's going to happen if we don't get our act together, and so I wrote a book going, and I was really into lots of stuff by Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye at the time, and the pop science guys say, "Hey, science will fix everything. We just gotta make a spaceship, and then everything else will follow." Right? So I sat down and went, "Okay," and which is an interesting thesis, right? I mean, especially if you're looking at, okay, how do we justify a space program, in a country which has other problems? How do we justify the search for these things? And yes, and the argument there is that the scientists who are going to solve a lot of your major problems are not going, oh, you know what? We need to make sure that that plane can land. Okay, that these cars don't skid off the highway. Let's go figure out how to make sure cars don't skid off the highway when they're going on or off the ramp, right? The exit ramp. But people who are working at NASA went, hey, this space shuttle comes in for a landing and it skids. How do we fix this? And they worked out that if you simply put divots into the road, when the shuttle lands, it gets better traction, doesn't skid. They turn around and implement this all across the roads, right? But your best scientists are not going to go, hey, you know what? I'm looking forward to a career, Mom. Oh, what, honey? In working with the roads, right? It doesn't work. It doesn't inspire people, right? But if you have a hard technological goal that you've all got to really, like, grit your teeth and figure out, that pulls your entire society ahead because this is the argument, right? It creates optimism, it creates confidence, and inspires young people to go into science and engineering, right? Which is never a bad thing, right? I did history for my degree. You know how many jobs there are for history majors? Exactly. You become a professor or you do something else, right? Um, so so I thought, okay, let me write a story where people are trying to look at the technologies that would help them go to space and to another star. How can we apply those technologies to solve our problems on Earth? What about climate change? What about food supply? What about housing? How do we work on these things? And I wrote a story about von Neumann technology and AI, which are things we're going to have to deal with. And the only questions are, to me, are we going to use that technology in a way that empowers people? Or are we going to try and control that technology or give it to corporations and find a way to still be poor even with infinite wealth? So, and we should at least try and get some carbon out of the air in the process, right? Because our only chances of surviving with the living standards or at least the lifestyles that we want and like the culture we have is if we can somehow make that transition next 100 years not a dark age. And we're at the point where only science and technology can help us from the mess we've created by applying science and technology without responsibility.
I just realized that we've been using the term hard science fiction, and essentially, I just want to explain what that is, so anyone who doesn't know. It's
Sorry.
just it's a subgenre of science fiction that uh, this is my own definition, that sort of puts science at the center of whatever sort of idea drives the story, and sort of like I want to say one thing about uh, science fiction that puts science at the center. I see two sort of broad kinds of stories. One is the kind of story that Navin writes, and a good example, or probably possibly one of the best examples of that, is The Martian by Andy Weir. Right. So now, The Martian is a story, where I think what excites us as readers, what we sort of enjoy the most out of that particular story, is the realism of the problem solving. This is a real problem, and this is how someone with sort of more specialized knowledge than us would solve it. And you can look at all his solutions and you can go like, okay, that's realistic, that's realistic, that's realistic. Now you know more. But there's a whole another kind of sort of hard sci-fi, which some people don't think of as hard. And a good example of this is The Three Body Problem by Cixin Liu. Cixin Liu is a Chinese science fiction writer. And what I want to do is like take 2 minutes to tell you about what I think is the climax of this novel. I mean,
Spoilers.
it's a spoiler, but it's not about the plot, so it's not a spoiler. But this is still the best part of the book. And so what happens is this scene on an alien planet where these aliens make a supercomputer and sort of a quantum super intelligence that is just one particle, and then they entangle it with another particle. So wait,
I had
walk
problems
you.
with that.
I'll walk you through this. I'll walk you through this. Okay. So first of all, they create an object that has many dimensions. I don't remember how many dimensions, but just get the idea. It's a multi-dimensional object. And the thing that happens with multi-dimensional objects is that if you kind of flatten them, if you take a 10-dimensional object and make it 9-dimensional, it sort of gets, for the lack of a better word, bigger. Okay? So one way to think about this, take a 3-dimensional object, take a pizza box, okay, or a sweet box, And now when we make it 2-dimensional, we open it out and we flatten it, right? So it's sort of gotten bigger. Do you know what I mean? The surface area has sort of gotten bigger, when we sort of open the pizza box and close it. So this is what these guys did. They took a high multi-dimensional object, which you can't see because it's so small, and they keep unpacking it. They keep subtracting dimensions from it till when it's 2-dimensional, it's so big that it covers the entire planet. And then on this particle, they using some fancy technology, they etch circuits into it. They turn this 2-dimensional particle into a motherboard and a processor and all of that. And then, and they're so sophisticated that they turn it into a computer. And it is a super intelligent computer. And then they repack it. So they take the 2-dimensional thing and they make it 3-dimensional, make it 4-dimensional. And then it goes from being big again to being tiny. You can't see it. And then they entangle this quantum super intelligent computer with another particle. And what entanglement sort of means is, this is my best way of getting this across, is entanglement is a property that seems to break the speed of light. Like information is sort of moving faster than the speed of light. So you have two particles. They're not next to each other by any means, but at the same time, if you affect one, the other one's reacting in a way that's so fast that it's not possible that information has passed through. So then they take these two quantum supercomputers that they've entangled, and they send one to Earth, and they keep one on their alien planet. And then they've now got something that can essentially like change the weather in Earth, and they instantly see it there. And it's sort of, it's amazing. Like, it is just genuinely the kind of, like, the scale of what they're doing is super cool. But at the same time, it's complete nonsense. Like, that's not how science works. That's not.
Except that if you tried a bit harder, you could have found a way where it wouldn't have been nonsense.
But I think criticizing the science of that story
Yes.
is sort of, the wrong
Yes,
the wrong
there's enough
approach.
authors attacking authors for no good reason.
Yeah.
Let's
So
not
I
go
think
there.
what those kinds of stories do is they make us excited about something. And that kind of excitement cannot be understated, right? Just that feeling of wonder, the feeling of climbing, the feeling that I had was like just being like on a high cliff and just seeing this vista of what's possible kind of spread out before you. And that sort of vertigo that goes like, whoa, like this is new. Uh, that's an amazing feeling, and that is something that a lot of science fiction authors actively are trying to make you feel. And so each one of them can be done badly, right? The first one, if your solutions aren't very good or aren't realistic, that's a legitimate criticism. And the second one, if you don't feel that sense of wonder, that sense of excitement, then that's a criticism of that story. Um,
No, I completely hear you on the wonder and beauty of science, right? Now, people who care about science, we're a shrinking congregation worldwide, right? Because we can have post facts now. We have people who get up and say things like, I'm not a scientist, but, like, wait a minute. There is no but, there's nothing you can say after the but, especially if it's about climate change, right? Or you pick physics topic, pick whatever topic, right?
vaccinations.
How do we end up in a world where people are bragging about how ignorant they are, how lazy they are to go off and find out about things? How do we get in this world? How do we let them get away with this? Right? But this has happened, right? Post fact, we have anti-vaxxers. There are anti-vaxxers in Sri Lanka. I was at a cafe where they put down a bottle in front of me and said it was raw water. Right? Raw water is water that hasn't been purified. Like, who in the tropics drinks water that hasn't been purified? Like, dead explorers, right? And people who, I don't know, but people. All right. Anyway, how is this happening? And hard science fiction is also a declining genre, right? There's a tool I use called BookFunnel, and they said, oh, give us submission ideas for subgenres. I said, okay, can you add hard science fiction to science fiction? I said, yeah. They never did, right? Not because they didn't think it was important, because the market doesn't think it's important. Hard science fiction is in decline, right? And that is all a symptom of the fact that we are in a world where people don't take facts as seriously. They take egos more seriously, right? They take their own little fancies, their shared nonsense. And we have also reached a point in technology where we can carry them. The person that goes, I won't vaccinate my child because vaccines are bad. Someone on TV said so. She can get away with that because there are doctors, there are emergency rooms, there are a few other kids who are still vaccinated, right? So people have carried people and allowed them to become stupid, right? And I'm not saying we should go back to like this horrendous razor edge world where if you are not clever, you will probably die because you drank raw water and ignored grandpa saying, don't do that, son. Like, I'm not saying that, right? But I am saying that as science fiction writers, we have a responsibility, and we have been failing in this, I think. There are science fiction writers who don't know much about hard science fiction, but then try and write it, right? I was actually in the collection, the most 5.5 collection with Udanji Weeraratne over here, right? He asked for submissions for stories, for hard science stories, and some of them weren't science stories. And it's like, these are people who make money writing science fiction, full-time incomes. What's going on here, right? So, as science fiction writers, we have a responsibility to try and inspire people. What you said about the wonder of the universe, right? The reason science fiction happens is because people thought, hey, let's not take Aristotle's word first. Let's drop these balls and see if they. Oh wait, they don't fall at different paces. This means everything is up for review. Let's get out there and find out how the world really works, and we'll write it down. And we'll come up with math. Like you, Newton, go invent calculus, right? Because we're gonna need this to figure this stuff out, right? Principia, right? So, sorry, I'll wrap up. Anyway, so we should be inspiring people to just casual interest to go out and learn about science, look up the Oklo reactor, OKLO, an all-natural nuclear reactor. Think about that for a bit, right? And inspire people to go into engineering and science, right? And that is how we will not go quietly into the night. The Age of Enlightenment was a good idea. Science is a good idea. We will not give up this planet to the Kardashians without a fight. Thank you.
Are we doing questions? Yeah.
Questions?
Amazing. Amazing.
Ma'am.
Yes, thank you for that. Right here. So yeah,
sorry.
so thank you for that very exciting exchange of ideas. So just wanted to say flag possible sort of way of reconciling some of the differences which you highlighted. What about the idea of soft science fiction? We know that
Fantasy?
Philip, well, fantasy might be one way of looking at it, but no, I'm thinking of the kind of work Philip K. Dick did, the kind of work Ursula Le Guin did, trying to kind of look at the soft sciences, say the social sciences, like, say, sociology, psychology. So some of those sciences have their own logic. There's an understanding of the world, of the self. There's a sense of wonder too. And perhaps, well, the kind of genre
No,
which they sort of inaugurated
no,
actually allowed for a kind
those
of...
those are my favorite kinds of stories. Like social science fiction is not is not a genre that, I mean, the tag might not be popular, but I think some of the best science fiction that we have, Kindred, Ursula Le Guin, like all of these, a lot of that is sort of inspired by the social sciences, anthropology, history, all of these things, and they're amazing and they're wonderful. And that's
Yeah,
why
sorry.
I think we have actively, I mean, sorry, I've actively not tried to create a hierarchy between these
There
two
are no
things.
bad genres, only bad writers.
Okay, yeah. And another sort of, and there are, take someone like Ted Chiang. Ted Chiang sort of writes about linguistics a lot, and linguistics is this interesting thing that is sort of science, sort of social science, and so you see his stories, they have the kind of flavor of social science, but at the same time, he is talking about something that's quite like rule-driven and sort of very scientific in that sense.
And the better writers are the ones who are doing things in different genres, right? If you only write one thing, you're kind of a boring person, let's put it that way, right? So, yeah, I don't think there's bad genres. While I like what I do particularly, right, for particular tasks, it does not matter. It's a tool, right? If you have a hammer to solve a problem or a saw, right, what matters is the craftsman, right? If you want to write a story about pandas wearing sun hats to talk about
Good story.
species going extinct in the Anthropocene, if you get more people to read that story and you get your point across, guess what? You win, right? That's perfectly fine.
Next
So
question.
I have one question about
Sir.
the practical aspect of science fiction writers. So I've been writing since ninth grade, and I'm 27 now, and I'm writing science fiction short stories. So I normally submit my stories to international magazines like Clark's World or Asimov's magazine, and it gets rejected. And in Asian community, we have rarely or any magazines for science fiction or pulp fiction magazine. So how can writers reach out to the
Yeah.
audience?
Yeah, no. See, we definitely need more sort
Amazon.
of homegrown, like, sort of venues for this stuff. There is no easy solution to that.
Yeah. Start with self-publishing on Amazon. Right? Get your stuff out there, right? Build a mailing list of people who are interested. Talk to other writers. Get to the 20 for 50K books group on Facebook, and you will find us there. No, don't let gatekeepers hold you back.
That's a good note to end on. Is that